This particular video, which I have entitled Seeing Beauty Where Others Do Not, is based on a particular way of thinking and a particular issue that's been it's been bugging me for a little while in terms of this video. It's been something I really want to talk about but haven't really found the words to say. The actual feeling of what it means to be an FA and what it means to be aroused and attracted to large people as an FA. And this is, I think I'm going slightly off with the main focus of this video, slightly off that point, but I think it ties in quite well with something I really want to get across to people in this video. So going back to the little phrase that I used to title this one, Seeing Beauty Where Others Do Not, what I want to get across to you is this is I think my ultimate idea of what it means to be an FA. Regardless of like gender or orientation, if you're someone who likes larger people in the society that we live in, particularly in the West, you are unusual in the way that you perceive attractiveness in other people. This is the point I think a lot of people don't quite understand. When a lot of people talk about how we fetishize large people, as a lot of people do, and I've talked about the idea of fetishization versus non-fetishization, and whether or not it's a fetish a lot, and never really come to a firm conclusion and said it's an issue that isn't always particularly relevant. But what I really want to get across today is actually what it's like to enter the mindset of an FA, what it's like to be in the metaphorical shoes of an FA, and really the problem I think is that other people don't really do this. They're quite happy to understand the dictionary definition of what an FA is, and they'll just say, oh, that's fine, we'll just sort of sweep it under the carpet, we'll ignore it, without actually thinking about the other elements of that, how that affects other aspects of your life, and what it really means, I think, in terms of your own mind and your own understanding of things. First thing I want to say that particularly annoys me about, I think, the way that other people try and understand this, or often the way it's even tried, other people try to explain this, other FAs, is that because they end up being asked very, very silly questions, or not really very helpful questions, about what it means to be an FA, like, why do you like what you like, what particularly about larger people attracts you to them. And of course the main problem with this is that you can't really find a logical explanation. There is no, not even in very high scientific terms, particularly for lay people, it's almost impossible for you to say, this is the reason buried deep in my psyche that I have a sexual attraction to this kind of thing. And the point about this particularly that I think should be got across to people is that if you asked anyone else about that, you would probably get a complete blank look. For instance, if you took like a sort of default stereotype kind of setting for sexuality that we often see, so for instance if you took the most stereotypical cis-sexual straight white Western guy and asked him why he would like the particular stereotype we have in the Western world, the particular like archetype of what we now consider beauty in terms of the world of fashion, everything else would be like a slim, reasonably tall, buxom, long-haired woman. And if you asked someone like, why do you like that kind of thing, they probably would either shrug or look blank and probably the basic idea, wonder why you are asking something that they've probably never been asked before, and they always assumed was like it was just the default setting, it was just what is, that is what is sexy, it can't be changed or it can't be taken out, I think, in terms of the level of subjectivity that a lot of people don't quite get. Anyway, going back onto point, the point is that you can't ask one group of people who just happen to buck a trend why they do something in terms of sexuality when actually you wouldn't ask everyone else. Like often when I'm asked questions like, okay, why are you a fat admirer, why do you like this kind of thing, I tend to, because there isn't an answer I can give, I just tend to turn it around onto the other person and say, I don't know, why do you like thin people? What is so great about them that you consider them to be the only thing that's attractive, essentially? But I think one of the problems with this thing is it just basically becomes like a simple divergence. It doesn't take into account the socio-political factors of privilege and a lot of the problems that larger people undergo, and that slightly by extension, one of the things that I do want to talk about without like really going over the top about it is the problems that people who like larger people, like me, undergo because of that, as a decided kind of secondary effect. So I think it's particularly interesting. So if you had someone, as there probably are quite a lot of people out there, who had a particular element of their sexuality that was focused on something that wasn't seen as being a part of the sort of like cultural, I don't know, central stereotype of what is sexy. The archetype probably would be a slightly better term, but like you have this very, very strong template of what is considered attractive for modern Western heterosexual men. So if you had someone who probably fitted slightly into that category, but had a particular thing for something that wasn't part of it, but wasn't seen as a negative aspect of it. So, for instance, someone who, I don't know, like really loved very tall people or very short people, I'm fairly certain there are people out there who have that element of their sexuality. The problem is, while it's not considered to be like something that's directly sexy to the main kind of like lowest common denominator masses, it wouldn't necessarily be seen as something that's like a negative trait of that. It would just be seen as a neutral trait that someone had a particular thing for. The problem with being an FA is that you directly go against a lot, not necessarily all, and this is one of the things I also want to draw out. One of the things that you have is that the element of your sexuality like goes against all of the cultural conditioning, all the cultural pressure that you have on you to like one kind of person. Now, I think one of the things that I've thought about is to try and get a visual exercise for people who aren't FAs to try and actually get into the mindset of what it is to be like. So to try and get that across to you now, I'd like you to, yes, this is probably going to sound a slightly cheesy kind of like mind building or sort of like exercise like that, but I wanted to try it anyway just to see what reaction it gets and if it helps people or if it changes the way people think. So particularly if you're not an FA, if you think that really deep down you just have a very normal attitude to sexuality that you can share with other people, you can say that that person is attractive and everyone else will agree with you, or that you really like that person, you'll get like sympathetic or like agreement nods or looks from other people. Try and sit down now, shut your eyes, and imagine the most attractive person you know. Hopefully it would be like maybe your partner. It doesn't have to be. It can be anyone of any gender, regardless of your orientation, anyone of any gender identity, man, woman, non-binary, transsexual, anything like that at all. And try and think about all the things that you find, particularly on a slightly physical level, because of course there will be other things, but just on a basic physical level, everything about them that you find really, really beautiful. And think about that for a little while. Then imagine that everything you thought was beautiful about them, everything about their physicality, all their grace, their beauty, the way they move, the way that they look, the way that other people look at them. Now imagine that everyone else thought that that was ugly, that no one else, you think, could ever understand why that person was beautiful, why they were so amazing, why you thought they were so sexy, so gorgeous. And not only that, but you have that template, that picture of someone who is so beautiful in your mind, and you go outside, you go into the nearest sort of like media shop, that nearest news agent, anywhere you could find access to like the print media, and you were faced immediately with like rows of magazines, all of them saying how to avoid looking like the person you feel really, really attracted to. And photos like saying, oh, look how bad this person is because they've become like that person. They've like got some of those traits. And think about how that even this happened from a young age, where you have always been attracted to like this person, this kind of person, other people who look like that individual. And every time you've tried to engage with the rest of the world, you know that they don't feel like that, and they would consider that person ugly. This person you see as unbelievably beautiful, as like the epitome of attractiveness, even just on the physical level, is seen as ugly by everyone else, and everyone else will want to try and avoid looking like that person at every opportunity. They will try everything to do so, or will appear to, because that's what like the media and the culture that you live in tells them. And imagine what that would feel like. Imagine what that would feel like if everything you considered attractive was something that was considered ugly by other people. Now, I don't know, that's something that I've had to deal with for quite a long time in myself, and I don't know what other people's reaction is going to that, but I think to a certain extent it's slightly warping in terms of the way that you think about other people, because even now nearly every time I think about my sexuality and I have a sexual thought in that way, I can still feel everyone else's hostility to it, everyone else's lack of understanding, everyone else's, like, the fact that, like, not about everyone else, but like the rest of the world, everyone around me, other people I know wouldn't understand, wouldn't share that thought, and would even, like, maybe consider it wrong that I had that element of there, because it probably isn't true, but the paranoia you develop when you think differently about the way people look, or the way that kind of thing, I think in any regard, it doesn't even matter about the physicality. If you were attracted, if you had a very strong impulse in your mind to like something that other people didn't like, or like really, not like didn't like, not like a kind of, like I have a hobby that other people don't share, it's that you have an enjoyment of something and like an imperative towards it, that other people seem to have like a repulsion from it. They will draw back and they will denigrate it, and they will attack it, really. So I think that's my sort of spiel about why it's so important, I think, to try and actually get into the mindset of an FA and understand that, because it's not just a case of fetishizing one element of a person, one physical aspect of other people, and saying, I just happen to really like this. That I think, in terms of the language, like, I might not understand exactly all the context that everyone would use that expression, but it seems to suggest that your sexuality is, in other cases, just normal, but you happen to have this one, often quite negative, fixation on one group of people that doesn't really, like, encompass everything else about them. Whereas the reality, I think, of being an FA is that you, or the way it feels at least, is that you see other people in a very different way to other people. And I think it's time really to stop trying to make us sound normal, or just to really trying to normalize the way that we think about that. I mean, other people will argue the other way, that we need to try and appear normal, to try and be accepted, to try and, like, get other people to be on our side or not attack us. But I think, from the perspective of being straight, male, and in many cases white, and probably thin as well to go with it, the problem with that is that you occupy a space of enormous privilege, and to try and just, I think a lot of FAs out there, or a lot of people who wouldn't like to identify as FAs, but in many ways are, in terms of the way that they think and the way that they engage with other people, is that they try and make it sound like, oh, it's not a big deal about me, I just happen to like big girls, or that kind of thing. And often they use very, very objectifying language to try and get it across to a culture, particularly like other straight men, who are very used to thinking about women in a way that is very objectifying. So they will, like, try and use language just to emphasize the physicality and that kind of thing, when really I think it's a much deeper difference, I think, between us and what would be considered normal, because there's not really an explanation for it, because other people, it's hard, I think, to try and understand the social, socio-cultural aspect of it. Sorry, I'm tripping over things at the moment now. Where you get to the stage that you have something that's so common in terms of the way that what people consider attractiveness, that it becomes like, okay, this is the benchmark, this is the standard of what it is to be attractive in our culture. And one of the things, of course, is there's a huge inequality of that is, like, really heavily enforced for women, but not nearly so much for men.